Welcome everyone to another episode in the series called Stronger Together. And we thank Facebook, MSME Ministry, the FICCI, UNDP, and GAME for doing this, because it's a very important set of conversations to have in the light of the COVID pandemic, and perhaps a fairly neglected conversation as well. It seems a little oxymoron, a little of an oxymoron to talk about social protection and entrepreneurship in the same breath, because social protection in the frame of what the government has looked at and what policy has looked at has been more promotive than preventive. And the definition of an entrepreneur itself is someone whose risk-taking ability is high, right? Like so. And we know for a fact that 63 million MSMEs, that's an oft-quoted figure now in the light of the COVID scenario. And we know that many of these, 30 to 40% of these enterprises might not survive beyond COVID if we are unable to take measures to be able to help them with liquidity, with economic resilience, and getting back on their feet, because their stock of capital, working capital, their stock of cash is fairly low, and they're running on fairly little oxygen, in fact, throughout the year. So more than ever, this is a very relevant conversation. So, and while we've been talking a lot about social protection entitlements for migrant workers, informal workers, and across to every citizen, from rations to other schemes that have been announced, what does it mean in the world of a micro entrepreneur who, in some sense, have had to fend for themselves and take the risk and the reward themselves? So I have a very eminent panel, so I'm going to go over to the panelists right away to get started on this discussion, and hope to get a lot more solutions and ideas by the end of the session on, one, what do we mean by social protection for mass entrepreneurs, and especially in the post-COVID environment, is this an opportunity for us to be developing those enduring, sustainable products and ideas and policy suggestions that can not just take us and help us get over the COVID scenario, but then set a firm foundation for what should be social protection for entrepreneurs that form bulk of today's segment in the product and services industries itself. So I will start with Mirai Ben. You've been working, I mean, Seva has, one of its pillars has been organizing for social protection. And you've in the early 90s started looking at products that might help rural women and help collectives, help some of the most remotely located as well as poorest women in the country, and look at social protection and look at it from the perspective of economic opportunity as well. So we'd love to understand how have you thought through it, and as well as what has been the impact of COVID on that social protection itself.
Thanks very much, Aarti, and thanks very much to GAME for inviting me here. I'll get straight to the point. From the very early days of Seva, we realized that individual informal women workers and their micro enterprises could not be sustainable, could not be viable unless they had some measure of work and income security and social security. As our members beautifully put it, these are two sides of the same coin. So from the beginning, we've been working on social protection, social security, and our understanding of social security from our sisters, our women at the grassroots, has led us to believe that social security for poor self-employed workers and their micro enterprises must include healthcare, childcare, insurance, pension, at least these, and housing with basic infrastructure. So our definition of social security is quite broad, you can see. So from the beginning, we've been organizing women workers. And the interesting thing is, I think, for this group, we've been organizing social protection, social security through micro enterprises. So not only is it a service, but for example, childcare, we have formed a cooperative, which is of course a collective enterprise, a micro enterprise, very small enterprise. And through the cooperative then, not only does the social security service reach women and their micro enterprises, but the service itself is a micro enterprise. So this is how people make a living through that very service. And similarly for healthcare, and similarly for our microinsurance cooperative. Pension is of course through Seva Bank, and housing and basic infrastructure services. That's a technical kind of specialized service. So that is through our Mahila Housing Seva. And more recently, Seva has formed a low-income housing company called Sitara. Now, so basically the approach has been to involve grassroots women and their enterprises in developing their own social security, which itself, as I said, is a micro enterprise in and of itself. Now, coming quickly to COVID, fortunately, we had an organized base and feet on the ground, so we were able to move fast, way before the lockdown. In fact, in the early days of March, when we realized what was happening, we began to work with local health authorities and our government, state governments in different states where Seva is active. So the first thing we've done is trained a team of 500 grassroots women workers. We call them Agivans as master trainers to send out the message on life-saving messages on health, what to do, what not to do, and also psychosocial and mental health support. The second, our childcare cooperative was already, as I said, on the ground. We have been cooking and providing hot-cooked meals to young children and their families. Obviously, they can't come to the childcare centers. They should not, must not, but we are cooking and providing food for them. And also we have been providing food kits and hygiene kits, not only to the childcare families, the families involved with childcare, but also more generally to our members. Third thing, we developed a microinsurance product in partnership with ICICI Lombard, and we have already launched that and covered more than 2,000 lives at this point. And finally, and most importantly, because after all, we are a relatively small women's organization, even though we have 17 lakh members across 18 states, we have been facilitating between our members and the government. So all the measures of our states, plus the Prime Minister's programs, actually reach the last mile, actually reach those poor women and their families. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirai Ben. I mean, it's very interesting how you talk about a holistic focus on health and then childcare and protection itself being an economic opportunity. So thank you so much for that viewpoint, because there have been enough evidence and literature that has also suggested that with social protection that can even encourage more entrepreneurship if it's done well. So I think it's great to hear from you about that. I want to go over to Aarti Singhji. Aarti Singhji, you've been as a general manager at SIDBI. You've been working over the last 28 years in various domains of finance, promotion and development of MSMEs. And you've been looking at what do MSMEs need from a financial services, financial products perspective. So what would be your definition of social protection for entrepreneurs and MSMEs? And two, in the light of COVID, what should be this domain of microinsurance or domain of products that probably deserve urgent attention or urgent definition even to then unlock?
If we talk about, let me first tell, like SIDBI has evolved. We have adopted Vision 2, which is attending to inclusive, innovative, and impact-oriented engagements. And so in that regard, what we have done is SIDBI has 4 pillars: promotion, financing, development, and coordination. Promotion is basically which attends to setting up of enterprise ecosystem. Development, which helps in stepping up side of enterprise ecosystem. Financing complements both, and coordination is we coordinate with who's who of enterprise ecosystem. So in that perspective, what we have done is we have for the P&D side, SIDBI has adopted Mission Swavlamban. Swavlamban is basically inducing entrepreneurship culture across the country. What we believe is that every individual has an entrepreneur residing inside, and we need to bring it out. And for this, what we have started doing is right from the first role model, which is parents, and within that mother, then primary school teacher, then college teacher. We are trying to influence these segments and reach out to young gen, so that this entrepreneurship culture gets imbibed. And so we talk about that, yes, there is a risk, but risk mein hi brisk walk hai. So, we have been working a lot in this space. For this COVID thing, in terms of social security for MSME, if you see, there are a lot of things which have been done, right from ideation stage to setting up, to expanding, to diversifying. Schemes like CGTMSC is there, credit guarantee fund trust for micro and small enterprises, which SIDBI manages. So loans up to 2 crores can be covered under this collateral free support can be given. There is an interest subvention scheme which government channelizes for MSMEs. And then there are institutions which are involved, right from enterprise promotion EDP programs to quality to skill upgradation program. Like we conduct a lot of Swalamban Kaushal Unnayan program, which is skill upgradation program. So these are, they built a Suraksha Kavach around an enterprise. And so, which is very important. So we look at social security not as a program specific, but as a system or strengthening the ecosystem. And so that has been our perspective. As regards immediate COVID challenge, SIDBI immediately proactively responded, and right from supporting startups which are engaged in COVID responsive areas. We have brought out schemes for micro and small enterprises, which is called Safe and Safe Plus, where we extend loans at 5% rate of interest to enterprises which are engaged in COVID responsive manufacturing activities. We have recently, you must have heard, RBI had announced 15,000 crore liquidity support. So SIDBI has designed a scheme of support to the entire value chain from supply side, which is microfinance institutions, small finance banks, banks, and NBFCs. And there we are trying to meet out the liquidity aspect side of institutions and MSMEs. So broadly, this is the thing. I think another thing I would like to add is when we are intervening or engaging in different programs, we have picked up 4 pillars, which are Sampark. Sampark is contact, and contact to remove information asymmetry. Then Samvad, there should be a dialogue. So what we do is, I will give you an example where we take micro enterprises and take them to big corporate or medium enterprises and expose them to good practices they adopt. Similarly, then there is a Suraksha. The third pillar is Suraksha. So what we have done is for startup enterprises, we have set up co-working space within SIDBI premises. So in Delhi SIDBI premises, we have a co-working space for startups. And similarly, we are replicating it in Bombay. So what we are doing is we are squeezing ourselves to ease out access. So this has been the Suraksha Kavach, which is the third. And fourth is Sampreshan. Sampreshan is where you kindle the policy aspect side of it. So we bring out a lot of publications, info series, and periodical publications like MSME Pulse, Microfinance Pulse, and Crisidex. So these are things broadly I would like to share. Yeah.
Got it. And is there specifically something in micro insurance that you've been looking at in the light of
So
COVID?
this CGTMSC itself, this is like a collateral free loan being guaranteed. So this covers the lending part of it. Yeah, pure insurance product we are not into. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Thank you, sir. I want to go over to Mukesh ji. Mukesh ji, you've been working extensively with micro entrepreneurs, with MSMEs, right, over the last many years. You've looked at cluster-based development as well and value chains. So I would love to understand from you that obviously the risk, I mean, there's probably no working capital, there is complete halt of business in several such segments. And even the recovery is going to be very, very different and evolving, and nobody knows how that recovery will happen across many industries, right? In the light of that, could you give us your thoughts on what should be the social protection risk products that one would like to see more of, whether it is from a policy or any other industry perspective? There's been a lot of call for extension of ESI, for example, in the government, moratorium, several policy cries to say that, you know, can you look at moratoriums on current or delayed repayments and several other such measures of the current products itself. I would love to understand from you if there is a pivot of current products or any tweaking that you think is urgently required. And two, what are some of these new risk measures that you would like to say are priority social protection instruments for micro entrepreneurs? And if you could also touch upon, is it industry specific? And if so, how is it manifesting between a manufacturing and a services, or between a gig kind of an entrepreneur versus, you know, a mass entrepreneur and so on?
Thank you so much. I would not necessarily go so much into the organization, what we do. I would rather like to focus upon the macro picture at the national level. And I think a good framework to look at social security would be at 3 stages. One is at the preventive stage, when you just start an enterprise and you want to make sure that, you know, in case something happens, there's something to take care of. The second very important part is for the existing enterprises, which are already functioning and need to ensure that they continue to work at a level where they don't falter because of the COVID-related crisis coming. And the third is, you know, once you've actually failed, and there will be many enterprises which will fail, how will existing instruments be able to take care of those situations? So if we had to look into these 3 sort of stages, I think that would give us a clarity about what kind of instruments already exist and what needs to be bridged in. So if I was to say at the preventive stage, you had raised an issue of, you know, that entrepreneurs are supposed to be high risk taking, and does it really make sense? And in fact, the last point on your note also, which you've shared, says, do you see a contradiction between these two? Well, really not, because you see, the entrepreneurs are not superheroes and superheroines who are supposed to be high risk takers, and not all of them are necessarily going in for very high growth, and they are not in the conventional sense of being called startups as currently we are called, because many of them actually get into entrepreneurship mode because of the TINA factor, which is there is no other alternative. So I have to, you know, do this job. So when you look at kind of a distinction between an employee and an entrepreneur, considering the fact that we have 2.3 persons employed per enterprise, there is a very fuzzy line between who's an entrepreneur and who's an employee. And therefore, it is very important to have maybe specially designed new products to protect entrepreneurship and also to foster and promote entrepreneurship, which is different from promoting employee welfare. And these are the things that can necessarily be taken care of by having certain models by which you could say that if you succeed, for example, this could be on more of an outcome-based thing. So if you pay taxes to the government, if you take loans, if you employ people and then give some kind of a social security benefits to your people, there should be an automatic, what you call support system, which is available to the entrepreneurs to be able to carry on with that. The second part, which I said, was more of an intermediate stage when you are already in business and you want that these businesses continue. Now, what I would like to bring your viewpoint to this is that, you see, all those who are already in the business, they already have some kind of social security net by, you know, having shoulders of their fellow men or fellow women to take care of them. And at this point of time, I do not see any of the government schemes really promoting and fostering these kind of self-help initiatives. So we have, of course, in women, we have self-help groups. the government has set up what are called SRLMs, and through that there are large number of programs going on. But this is not what you see in case of typical micro, small, medium enterprises, where there is, I think, need for not really looking at big things like clusters, because cluster is like a city or a town. I would much recommend if you can have a fostering of maybe 5 enterprises buying raw material together. If there are 10 enterprises who have spare resources and machines lying with each other, then rather than the 11th one or maybe 2 of them who do not have the equipment with them, they falling back on each other and sharing those resources available with each other. Many of these people have serious problems in reaching out to the markets. So can we have certain schemes and programs which can foster what is called marketing consortia? And all these consortia need not be very rigid legal structures. They can be just created, they can do the job, and then they can dissolve if, once the COVID situation is over and some of the entrepreneurs are able to take it forward on a big scale, they can certainly, fall out of those groups and carry on. And the final one, of course, is at the end, once you've fallen off and you are, just because you failed and you are not able to carry on. So we have some of the schemes which the government had started, the Atal Pension Yojana, the Jeevan Bima Yojana. Now those numbers, particularly the National Pension Scheme numbers under the Swavlamban NPS, shows us very big numbers of about 2 crores or so. That's a very big number. But if the government can now come up at this point of time and maybe support and foster the subscription to these kind of schemes, because it is here that the government is also putting in the money, and it is also giving you that kind of a suraksha kavach that this is being managed by the government and not by somebody that the entrepreneurs will not really be able to trust upon. So I guess if you can look at this kind of a framework, we will probably see that the initial 2 stages are still not decked up at the national level, although the third one is, which can be sort of fostered and supported at a bigger level. Thank you.
Thanks, Mukesh. Very, very interesting point around also what are intermediate structures that will allow us to go over the stage, but also set a foundation for once the recovery has happened, hopefully at some point of time, right? So thank you so much for that insight. Would love to go over to Poonam ji, and you've been working through the entrepreneurship development focus, as well as the, being a part of the National Institute for Entrepreneurship and Small Medium Business Development. And I'm sure you must have played a large role in kickstarting and several of these initiatives of entrepreneurs taking off, right? And we know that the support for an entrepreneur to kickstart their initiative and just go from 0 to 1 is a lot larger than those that look at business continuity or scale and so on. I mean, the amount of support in some sense diminishes as the enterprises, go into their life cycle. And there is enough support to even be done if you look at from a self-employment to entrepreneurship conversion perspective, which also Mukesh touched upon. It was only 2.3 persons per entrepreneur. So I'd love to understand from you 2 parts, right? From kickstarting the entrepreneurship itself and fostering entrepreneurship. And one of the ideas that came out of the research that Game did earlier was, can we have sabbaticals, like the equivalent of an industry sabbatical, to go try out something, make sure that it gets to some place, and then, sometimes it might not succeed and you come back. Because at Lalav, we know that entrepreneurship is really for the brave today. Right, like it's or for the really desperate if there's no other alternative, the Tina kind that we just spoke about. So, but how do are there social protection related measures, like even something of an equivalent of a sabbatical where you have some income, you get into entrepreneurship, or what are those looking like, and what are those looking like? Are they different from what is needed for business continuity? If we look at the non-monetary side of social protection itself, and some of the other in-kind elements that we can give in. And again, in the light of COVID, from an entrepreneurship development and entrepreneurship uptake, what are you seeing as necessary? Because social protection solves for that as well.
Thank you, Aarti and the Game team for providing me this opportunity to interact with the panelists. NIESBUD, National Institute of Entrepreneurship and Small Business Development, is mainly into training, research, and consultancy to promote entrepreneurship and self-employment. Social security, as other panelists have very clearly pointed out, that is one of the important aspect. And in our training program also, we are emphasizing on health insurance and then other insurances, as well as health, hygiene, um, security in terms of PF and ESI to their employees. Aarti, I would like to bring some, of course, COVID and post-COVID, there are many challenges to MSMEs. That is very true, and everyone knows, studies have also pointed out. But I believe that entrepreneurship means converting challenges into opportunities. And not only post-COVID, during COVID also, we have seen our few trainees, entrepreneurs, they have started activities like one self-help group. They have started making PPE kits. Similarly, sanitizers, masks. I mean, from each and every part of the country, NIESBUD is organizing program at pan-India level, and from a different part of country, we have received information that our trainees, group of trainees, they have helped a lot to the society. They have started giving food to the people, migrant laborers and all, and then those, especially those who were into ready-made garments or stitching and tailoring, they have started converting their enterprise for COVID related health related products. So that is something very important. And when I mean, not only post COVID, during this period also, if we talk about institute NIESBUD, we have started awareness creation program on COVID-19 to all our trainee, and we are also planning to go online for entrepreneurship development program. And from Monday onwards, we will be organizing one trainers training program on employability, entrepreneurship and life skills online course. And of course, for our entrepreneurs, there are many opportunities, post-COVID opportunities related in the field of digital marketing, then health and hygiene. Our trainees now, we are planning to, especially from ITIs, planning to upgrade their skill to make ventilators or repair and maintenance of ventilators, so that the need of the hour can be fulfilled. Then we are also requesting various government organization and non-governmental organization to support these enterprises, because they cannot do such type of activity without support. And National Backward Class Finance and Development Corporation has come forward to provide financial assistance for making their products. And the state governments they are also purchasing these type of products from our trainees. Of course, they'll have to follow the norm standard of the government. That is, I mean, health department, that is very much important. So that's what NIESBUD is doing, and we are also planning more in terms of activities related to uh, uh, bring them up to a certain level so that the damage or the impact may be minimized. Thank you.
Thanks, Poonamji. Very useful insights from an entrepreneurship promotion and development perspective. It's a good segue into, I mean, we've spoken a lot about products that we can tweak or bring in and utilize in the current environment that already exists and across different sectors and so on. What can policy do? I'd like to ask all of you, where can government policies play a role? And social protection floors, social protection policies have always been a matter of contention, right? Like there's the whole thought process from universal basic income to all the way running up to, is there a, is there a promotion versus prevention, and what do those look like? So starting with Mirai Ben, where do you think policies can help support the social protection work that needs to be done in the light of COVID?
Actually, policies, Government of India, as Mukesh ji has already pointed out, there are several policies. Then General Manager from SIDBI, he has also very well narrated about various policies and program. If you talk about NIESBUD or Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, we are into training, research and consultancy. So definitely we will recommend, we will conduct studies to promote, to suggest government to provide social security and protection. There are few policies and schemes which are already implemented by different ministries, departments, but I think a lot more can be done. And this is the right time we should do research and suggest some suitable strategies to the government.
Thank you so much, Poonamji. Thank you. I mean, evidence is going to be a critical role here so that we do the right instruments for the right populations. Mirai Ben, would you like to talk about policy suggestions?
Thank you, Aarti, and thank you, Poonamji, for leading this section off. I would like to say two things. One is, I think that at the macro level, actually, there is a lot more that we have to do now. It's nothing new, as all of you have mentioned, but it now takes on a new emergency, because unfortunately, this is not going to be the last epidemic or pandemic or disaster. So I think at the macro level now, it's high time we move towards some form of basic universal social protection. India is a signatory to floor level minimum social protection floor at the ILO since 2009, if I'm not mistaken. So this is not a new thing. We all agree. In 2010 or 11, I was part of a committee which worked with the Ministry of Labor and Employment and actively with small and medium industry associations to come up with a plan for universal social protection. And we found that it's affordable, it's doable, it can be contributory. There are many things that have already been discussed. So really, I'm saying that we know what we have to do. We have to do it. And most importantly, we have to invest. We cannot have a program, a relief measure of 0.7% of GDP when 500 million informal and migrant workers are suffering. And it is these type of colleagues and fellow citizens who are in the MSME sector or nano enterprise sectors, as we all have been speaking. So first and foremost, universal social protection. I think we should take out the plans we've made, dust them out, do some recalculations and revisiting, but it can be done. And within universal social protection, I would particularly like to focus on two aspects. One is universal healthcare, which is an agreed upon policy of the Government of India as per National Health Policy 2017. Yet we are hardly spending 1.2 or 1.3% of Indian GDP on healthcare. That needs to go up to 2.5 to 3% of GDP. Otherwise, we'll be having the same conversation some years down the line. The second, most importantly for women and for building our future, is universal childcare. We cannot have falling women's workforce participation rates and then hope that, well, somehow it will come up or pop up through an entrepreneurship. We need to create a supportive ecosystem which includes childcare so that half of this country's workforce can actively participate in the rebuilding of our economy post-COVID. So those are the things, two things at the macro level. The other thing immediately for MSMEs, which we have been pushing, is one, there should be a livelihood restoration cum social security fund. Already I know that our colleague from SIDBI has already discussed some ideas, but we need payroll compensation like other countries have done and covering of fixed costs. It could come from this large fund to which corporates, government, others can contribute. Perhaps it could be a tax-free fund, so people will be willing to contribute. Second, immediately working capital. Right now, in the next 2 weeks, if we do not get working capital, several of SEVA's collective social enterprises run by women, built up over 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears, are going to collapse. And who knows whether we'll be able to revive them. So working capital immediately, some maybe some grant or loan or some mix thereof. And then of course, loan at lower interest rates. And I would say, in addition to this livelihood restoration stimulus, we need to build in social protection. So amount of insurance, micro insurance, and this is not very costly. The products that we have are 350 rupees per annum per head. Even micro enterprises can afford to support slowly their they're not all employees. Usually it's worker-owner situation. So these kind of products are not costly products, but they have to be rolled out quickly, efficiently. Poor people and those working in MSMEs need that kind of social security support now. They cannot wait till your office restarts and then you start the claim process. So these are some of the things that we feel have to be done immediately so that we can jumpstart our economy and also provide social protection and also help our MSMEs survive, many of which are very nano, tiny micro enterprises. Many of them are run by women as well.
Thanks, Mirai. Then wanted to go over to Mukesh ji to ask if you have some policy recommendations for the MSMEs across different sectors that you're working with. And what do you think also needs to be done to make sure that the small informal entrepreneurs or really the segment that requires it the most is able to get the social protection?
So I have 4 suggestions to give. One is that I think it's a time for government to start up a new scheme, which they are already putting it on the table. They are working on the background of that. And that is to help groups of enterprises help themselves. And if, this would be a kind of very flexible scheme which they are working on, in which groups can come forward and say, this is the gap, viability gap funding that we need in order to carry ourselves forward. And the amounts could vary from, few thousand rupees to maybe few lakh of rupees. This, I think, is very important because at a decentralized level, not only it's a matter of pumping in a bit of viability gap funding, it's also a matter of identifying potential areas where if some amount of support is given, as Mirai Ben was also saying, then it will be able to tide over this crisis. And some amount of knowledge support also and linkage support is necessary. So most of our schemes which the government usually comes up are very rigid in structure, saying, you can only serve a cup of tea for this much money and all that stuff. So this is something which needs to be very broad, flexible, where you ensure that the people help themselves and there is a kind of co-funding or a viability gap funding. The second part, which I think what the government should do is that, we have always been talking about GDP as a whole, as if, every GDP growth is going to be very benign. This is not really so. We have never sort of categorized GDP as golden GDP, silver GDP, and bronze GDP. So I would necessarily say if we can come up with some parameters to classify the GDP into three parts and say the golden GDP at this point of time is that which creates employment, which creates growth, which ensures, some poverty alleviation going to take place in the decentralized regions. And then identify those sectors and geographical regions where we believe that the lever is very high. So with a small amount of money, the resultant is going to be very high. So if there was, for example, a comparison to be made between setting up a new power plant or a cement plant and helping 100,000 women or men or, artisans supporting, and then looking at the amount of money which has to go into both of them, where should the government put in the money? And that, I think, is a very important element to now look at as we are looking at essential goods and services. I should say essential GDP and non-essential or postponable GDP, I would say. The third part, which I think is very critical, is that, the government is putting in a lot of money through Reserve Bank of India, and a new stimulus is also going to come up with 1 lakh crore of rupees specifically targeted for MSME. So we have an idea of what Dr. Singh said about the CGTMSE. So CGTMSE is targeted at individual enterprises. Can we have, at this point of time, something like the banks being given a blanket 25% credit guarantee, which means that if the banks are putting in a 1 lakh crore rupees to MSMEs, then in case there is a default or something happens, 25,000 crores will be, taken over by the government as a kind of credit guarantee to the banks, not to the individual enterprises. So can we have that kind of a ballpark figure which stimulates the banks? Because the major problem is that the money is being pumped to the banks, but banks are still very risk averse. So can we, motivate them to come forward and say, okay, at least 1/4 of my, NPAs, which will happen in such a kind of situation, we will take, the government will take care of it. And finally, I think once the COVID Kahar is sort of tapering off, there will be a huge problem that many of the workers and laborers will not want to necessarily go back. Now, can we have a kind of matchmaking system where the enterprises are specifically saying that we need such and such type of a labor, and we can categorize the entire labor into 5 or 7 or 8 categories, saying these are the marketing people, these are the production people, these are the packing people, these are, and then once you've categorized it, you also have a matchmaking as to where these people are. So they could be in Ganjam, they could be in Bihar somewhere. And then the government should not only just do a matchmaking through a kind of IT tool, it should also go one step ahead to facilitate the travel of such people, maybe even support the travel of such people, and also provide some kind of a social security net to such people, so that those who are initially taking the courage to go back to the cities, very well knowing that the COVID is not really gone completely, it is still tapering off, that they are actually supported to come back to factories to push the lifeline on.
Very interesting point, because in another discussion, cash advances for construction workers by construction entrepreneurs and the small contractors was talked of as a way to incentivize them to even come back. So that's a way of also implementing social protection.
Aarti, can I
yeah, Mirai Ben.
Just sort of jump in here because Mukesh ji stimulated a thought, which is that just continuing on what he said, two quick things. One is a long-standing demand of organizations like SEBA has been, can we give identity cards to informal workers and migrant workers? One of the major issues is we have not been able to track them. Secondly, these must be portable. So if someone comes from Ganjam, they cannot be told in Surat, sorry, you're not going to get ration because your card is in Ganjam. So they have to be portable. And the last big thing I wanted to, so identity cards are critical. I think one of the hardest things has been, it's been impossible to track informal and migrant workers. And this will fit nicely with the matchmaking idea Mukesh ji mentioned. Second, with regard to social protection and rigidity of schemes, I think it's really important to engage and dialogue with MSMEs, with informal worker organizations, so that we come up with the correct kind of social protection, so that we get rid of these rigidities and we are inclusive rather than thinking, how do you exclude this one, that one, and the third? Thank you.
Thanks, Mirai Ben. Very, very useful inputs. R.K. Singh ji. Any recommendations from your side for policies?
So a lot of action-based policies woven around demand and supply side, attending to hard and soft infrastructure, the consumption and production side. Taking lead from Mukesh ji when he was mentioning that there should be some incentive mechanism which works out the security aspect. I will give one example. Like we had brought out PSB loans in 59 minutes. It's a platform which we have set up where it's a matchmaking between loan seeker and loan provider. And the idea there is those who are better governed and better compliant. If they are regularly filing GST, they are regularly filing income tax returns, maintaining their bank statement, e-bank statement, they should get faster access to credit. Now, this is one example which instills governance, gives access to credit in principle is given in 59 minutes. So, few lakh enterprises have benefited from this. Coming back to the non-financial side, which you had also mentioned about sabbatical aspect, and Mukesh ji mentioned about localized pool being tapped. So we need to work, and we are doing some pilots to set up livelihood labs where people walk in and they want to hone up their skill. We enable them to do that. I will give another example where we are working is we have set up 1,000 Silai schools which are manned by homepreneurs. They are women entrepreneurs at home. And so we are doing two things out there. Recently with this COVID, we got them trained to make masks. And so we gainfully engaged them during this period. They were also quite responsive. Now, suddenly they have come up with a good demand that we should, you should connect us with some designers so that we are able to look at the market from that perspective. Similarly, we are like, I will give you one example of enterprises will open up. Right. So we are, we call it Solomon Suraksha Kavach. So if an enterprise, suppose gets opened up on a particular date, we are experimenting this in Northeast. So we provide a kit to them, soap, sanitizer, disinfectant, bleaching powder, mask, and so for the workers. So now what happens? This is a kit for ensuring the safe side, but it is also involving local enterprises who are manufacturing these things. And so you kindle the entrepreneurship culture because entrepreneurs are one step ahead. They don't sit idle. So, and you can really engage them for these productive activities. So a lot of action-based policy endeavors need to scale up. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Such a rich sharing of ideas and insights. And I think we've just run out of time to have the last question. But if we can, I'm just going to do a quick wrap up of some of the really fascinating insights and ideas that came out of this discussion, where we talked first about the inclusive nature of social protection itself, involving healthcare, childcare, and even looking at how social protection can be an economic opportunity in itself. Then we talked about based on the phase of the enterprise. Are you looking at preventive for new enterprises or for business continuity for existing enterprises? And those, I mean, if in the unfortunate situation that they'll have to wrap up, what might be some of the other more urgent social protection measures? And then we talked about entrepreneurship fostering and development, and how some of the social protection can come in to enable the lowering of risks there. And quite a few ideas around the policy side of reviving the social protection floor conversation, looking at contributory schemes as well, having a livelihood restoration fund, looking at viability gap funding, as well as knowledge and linkage support, flexible and broad structures, and not kind of pigeonholing it into a fixed support, because the situation is going to really evolve. Credit guarantees to banks, which can then lend to entrepreneurs and look at their risk schemes, as well as looking at how entrepreneurs can look at social protection for their employees, and what does that look like. We also said foundationally we need an identity card which is portable for informal workers and migrants, and also talked about entrepreneurship itself responding to the risks and the urgent situations of other workers and other entrepreneurs. So I think it's been a really rich sharing from experts across this panel. So thank you all so much for your time. And we really look forward to this going live and a transcript of this for wider sharing and for wider ecosystem knowledge and interactions responses therein. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.